Right now, at this moment, I would like to introduce Miss Angela Laws. Angela Laws is an endangered species conservation biologist and the climate change lead for the Xerces Society. Based in Sacramento, California, Angela is working on habitat restoration for pollinators and monarch butterflies in California. She received an MS in ecology from Utah State University and a PhD in biology from the University of Notre Dame. Dr. Laws, thank you so much for joining us this morning. Take it away.
Okay. Thanks everyone for being here today and for inviting me to be a part of this great conference. I'm going to talk a little bit about restoring habitat for monarchs and some of the basics. So just first, what is Xerces? We are a nonprofit focused on protecting biodiversity by protecting invertebrates. Most of our work is focused on pollinators. We have a large pollinator team, but we also have teams dedicated to pesticide reduction and endangered species. I'm on the endangered species team. And we do a lot of outreach, education, advocacy. We do a lot of on-the-ground restoration work. Much of our pollinator team works in working lands to create habitat for monarchs and other pollinators and beneficial insects. So I'm sure you've seen this already today. Monarchs are not doing so hot. These are data from the Western Monarch Thanksgiving count, which Xerces started with Mia Monroe from the National Park system. So you can see when we started this in 97, there are approximately 1.2 million monarchs along the coast. In the 1980s, it was estimated that there were 4 million monarchs overwintering along the coast. That number kind of dipped down to 200,000. And then in 2018, the population crashed to less than 30,000. Then again, last winter, the numbers declined to less than 2,000. So the situation is grim, but there is a lot we can do. Insects tend to be resilient. Their numbers can bounce around a lot. So that means that they do have the capacity to recover. And the nice thing I think about working with insects is that habitat that we create in small spaces can be really meaningful. There's a lot we can do in our everyday lives to support monarchs and pollinators. And it can make a difference, especially here in California, which is such an important part of the range. So when the numbers dropped in 2018, we came up with our Western Monarch Call to Action with the 5 actions we thought would contribute most to monarch conservation. So those include protecting and managing the overwintering sites in California. These sites have no formal protection, and every year sites continue to get lost or degraded. So they need to be actively managed. We need to restore breeding and migratory habitat in California. We need to protect monarchs and their habitat from pesticides. We need to protect the breeding habitat in the West outside of California, but California is a really key part of this. And we need to continue doing research so that we can improve our management recommendations over time. So I'm going to focus on these two, protecting habitat and then pesticides. Protection goes hand in hand with that. There are many opportunities to create monarch habitat, including in our cities and towns. So it's not something that only needs to happen in pristine natural areas. Urban areas can provide really great habitat for pollinators, and some urban areas have really high diversity of bees and other pollinators. And there's so many places where we can have habitats. Most people think about their yards, but if you don't have a yard, that doesn't mean you can't get involved, because there's so many places where we can add habitat. Public gardens, parks, schools. Many schools now are starting to have pollinator gardens or vegetable gardens. Our offices. This is a picture of monarch habitat in an office building in Oregon. I think it would be really great if our retailers started to transition from that standard landscaping they all do to native plants that support pollinators and other wildlife. The churches' rights of way, so land under power lines or along roadsides, can be great pollinator habitat, and abandoned lots and other places. So as you start looking around the community, I think you'll see a lot of opportunities to create habitat and use that space so that we're sharing our communities with the pollinators that do so much for us. And of course, in natural areas as well, We have some guidance for managing monarchs in the West in natural areas and grazing lands. I'm going to talk about several publications that we have. And when I'm finished, I'll put links to all of these in the chat box. But then cropland can also be a great place to add pollinator habitat. And every day we work with really great farmers who are committed to protecting pollinators on their lands. So places like hedgerows, field margins, unused corners of buildings or where buildings are can be great places to add habitat. We do have a guide to creating habitat on farms in the Central Valley, but I think a lot of that guidance might also be applicable to farms generally in California. So what does high quality monarch breeding habitat look like? It has native milkweed. Of course, that's the plant that the caterpillars need. For food, adults will take nectar from the monarchs, but of course the adults are generalists. They'll take nectar from a variety of plants, so they need nectar plants. Things that are going to be blooming throughout the migratory and breeding season when they're going to be there. They need safe habitat that's protected from pesticides and high levels of pathogens. For example, because tropical milkweed doesn't senesce, especially in Southern California where it's nice and sunny all year, there's a parasite called OE that tends to build up. So you get higher rates of disease in areas with tropical milkweed. I saw that Antonio suggested cutting it down to the ground in November. That's one good compromise. And then they need other features for shade and perching. So I'm going to talk about each of these. So again, we suggest planting native milkweed, and it sounds like you just got some really amazing detailed information about establishing and growing milkweed in Southern California, which is amazing. It's a great resource. Narrowleaf milkweed is your best bet. It's going to be the most readily commercially available, but woolly pod and California milkweed are also options for your area that are historically native. In Southern California, we recommend you don't plant milkweed at overwintering sites. They don't need it in their overwintering sites. They do need nectar, though. And we recommend, when possible, trying to plant multiple species, especially if you're doing some habitat work in a large area, because the more species of milkweed that you have, each of those species is going to have a different phenology, meaning they're going to be emerging or flowering at different times. So if you have different species, you're more likely to prolong the amount of time during the year when you have milkweed available. We are doing some work to expand the commercial availability of California milkweed, and it sounds like there's some great efforts in Southern California as well, which is really important to get different ecotypes, right? We've been collecting California milkweed in the Bay Area. That's not necessarily going to be the best option for planting in San Diego area, right? So I think supporting those efforts that Antonio talked about for collecting these seeds is really going to help support monarchs by making those other species of milkweed more readily available for home gardeners and others doing restoration work. Of course, nectar plants are important. Adult monarchs need nectar. Having a variety of plants is a great way to support monarchs. This one was taken in my yard just like 2 weeks ago, feeding on my coyote mint, which is very exciting. So you just want to make sure you have a variety of plants blooming from spring through fall. If you're at or near an overwintering site, try to have things that are blooming in winter because they will drink nectar in the winter. We think that nectar sources early spring and late fall are especially important for supporting the migration. And you guys know it's so hot and dry in California in the fall when they're heading back to the overwintering sites. There's not always a lot blooming on the landscape. So this is something really important to think about. On our website, we have some plant lists of nectar plants that monarchs like. We also have some plant lists for pollinators in general, because as a lot of you probably know, monarchs are declining, but there are many other species of butterflies and bees and other pollinators in California that also need our help. That's the nice thing, is because when we create habitat for monarchs, it's going to support many other pollinators. Shade, so planting some trees or shrubs to provide some shade can be really valuable. Monarchs tend to like to perch in these trees to get some shade, get some relief from the heat. There's some evidence that monarchs will preferentially lay their eggs on shaded milkweed. So that's really can be beneficial. This is a picture of a natural area in Sacramento area. And I think you can see in the front, we have some showy milkweed that's all senesced. It's all dry and dead. But behind that, in the shade of these oak trees, a lot of the milkweed is still green. And so I think that might be another bonus, is that if you have some shaded areas that can prolong the season when the milkweed is available for the monarchs. And then, of course, we need to protect the habitat from pesticides. It's really important. And we recommend you avoid using pesticides for cosmetic reasons around your homes. Most insecticides are broad spectrum, which means they kill a wide range of insects. So maybe you're spraying something because you don't want aphids, but it's also likely to kill pollinators. And many of those insecticides stay in the environment for a really long time. And I know it's something you don't really think about. You think you spray it, it works, and then it's gone. But that's not always the case, especially with pesticides like neonicotinoids. They can stay in the environment for months or even years. I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. So this is a thing. I think that when people think of pesticides, they think of agriculture, but actually our cities and towns can have pesticide levels that are just as high or higher than we find in agricultural areas. And this is an area where I think we have a lot of power to move the needle here, right? We can talk to our community leaders, our neighbors, business owners, landlords about reducing pesticide use. And that will make such a big difference for monarchs and other wildlife. So we wanted to know, okay, are monarchs encountering pesticides and milkweed in the Central Valley? We collaborated with Matt Forrester and Chris Halsich, which are two biologists at the University of Nevada, Reno. And we basically went out in June of 2019 and we collected the leaves from 227 milkweed plants. So a lot of different plants. We collected them from urban areas, agricultural areas, natural areas, and from nurseries. So we wanted to see, what is the potential pesticide pressure that monarch caterpillars are experiencing in the Central Valley. And what we found was that out of 227 plants, every single sample had pesticides. There's not one sample that didn't have pesticides on it, with an average of 9 different pesticides per plant, which was really shocking to us. 64 different pesticides total. The samples with the highest number of pesticides were one agricultural roadside site and the milkweed that we purchased from nurseries, which had about 25 different pesticides on them. So this is really problematic when we're thinking about protecting the species. We need to provide it with habitat that's protected. And, I'm just talking about presence or absence, so the concentration or the amount of pesticides also vary among these different types of sites. Even when the amount of pesticide isn't at a lethal level, if it's sublethal, so it's not going to kill the monarch, it can still have a lot of negative effects on that animal and affect its ability to bounce back, right? So this brings up some problems like pesticide drift. Okay, so I said we collected from urban areas. We collected some milkweed from the backyard of my coworker who has lived in her house and does not spray. She's been in her house for 10 years. She doesn't use pesticides. There are a lot of different pesticides on the milkweed, and she was very upset. But that's because of drift. When you spray a pesticide, it doesn't just stay there. It can drift. So what's in your yard is not just what you're using. It's what all your neighbors are using. It's what the city is using. It's all of this together, which is why I think we need some community level efforts to educate people. It's not just monarchs. I wouldn't want my pet family members around this either. And then the other issue is something called these neonicotinoids are an especially problematic type of systemic insecticides. So when I talk about systemic insecticides, what does that mean? Well, it means that if you spray a plant, maybe you spray the leaves, the plant takes it up and expresses it in all the tissues. So maybe the leaf got sprayed, but now the pollen and the nectar are also going to have those pesticides in them. The other thing that happens with neonicotinoids They're long-lived, so they're going to stick around for months, sometimes years, in pieces where they're sprayed on trees. What happens is maybe you take a plant home from the nursery, it's been treated with neonicotinoids, you plant it, those pesticides get into the soil and get taken up by all of the plants surrounding the plant. So now you're spreading this pesticide in this habitat where you're trying to create to benefit monarchs. And so this is something that we need to be thinking about. One way to address this is making sure that we're buying bee-safe plants, bee-safe, pollinator-safe, monarch-safe, all the same thing. So we need to be talking with our nurseries or careful about where we're purchasing our plants to make sure that when we're buying plants for pollinator habitat, that it's going to be safe for those pollinators. So some simple steps to do that are to seek out organic plants and seeds, avoid plants grown with neonicotinoids and other similar systemic insecticides, because those are going to be really harmful to pollinators and they're going to stick around. And talk to the people working at the nursery. Ask them what steps they are taking to offer pollinator-friendly plants. What are their pest management strategies? And I think we have a lot of power here, right? Because if nurseries start hearing from more and more people that this is something consumers want, I think they're going to pay attention to that. So we have two great new fact sheets to help you. One is on buying bee-safe plants. So it goes through the different pesticides you need to worry about. It talks about questions to ask at your nursery. It talks about how to start that conversation. And then we also have a guide for nurseries who want to offer bee-safe plants. So if you know, so this is something that you take with you and give to the nursery to try and start that conversation. I'll post links to these as well. Okay, so those are sort of the basics of monarch habitat, right? You need native milkweed, you need nectar plants, especially early spring, late fall. You need to avoid spraying your habitat with pesticides and try and harass your neighbors and ask them not to spray in your habitat as well. Xerces does a lot of work. I just want to talk briefly about the work we do to create habitat for monarchs. We work throughout California. Much of our work is in agricultural areas. These are the green symbols on the map there. We have partner biologists with the NRCS that can help create pollinator habitat. So if any of you have working lands, you can contact us. We can help you create habitat on your land. We also developed a program called Be Better Certified, which is it's a third-party certified set of standards to show that you are producing food in a way that prioritizes the protection of pollinators. We have some products on market. We've got some blueberries, other products that are already out that are Be Better certified. As I mentioned, we're working to expand the availability of some milkweed varieties. We work with land managers to improve management for monarchs and pollinators. Right now, we have a grant to work with several state parks to improve their management plans for overwintering sites so that we can actively manage these groves to protect monarchs long term. And we have a project called our Xerces Habitat Kit program. So these marks and stars are the areas where people have received kits. So basically, we provide plant materials to people who are doing restoration work. So we work with people who are creating habitat on working lands or public spaces, like natural areas or school gardens. Oftentimes, there are people already out there, really knowledgeable people doing really great work. The native plants can be expensive, and that can be a barrier to getting habitat on the ground. So we kind of came up with this idea as a way to increase the amount of habitat that's happening out there. So in the last 2 years, 2019 and 2020, we gave away over 72,000 plants, supporting 55 projects in natural areas, urban areas, ag areas. This picture is a planting at Delta College, which is in the Central Valley. It's going to be a pollinator habitat, but also used as outdoor class space. So we're doing it again this year. We just finished reading through applications. We have 12 projects in Southern California that are getting funded this year. Some really great projects in community gardens and some school gardens. I think there's a vineyard in there. So a lot of great projects. If this is something that you're interested in, email me. Our next round of applications will be open in April. So we take applications in April, and then the plants are ready in the fall. So November, early November. So this is just another opportunity if you have an idea of some place that you could do some work, but maybe don't have funds to get the plants, you can watch for this program next year. And then, of course, just to plug for our community science project for Monarchs, the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper. You know, up until a few years ago, most of the information we had about monarchs was about the Eastern monarchs. And this great effort by community scientists all over the West has really helped us learn a lot about the biology of the species and improve our management recommendations. So if you see a monarch or a milkweed, you can log it on the mapper. You can also use iNaturalist, which is a lot more user-friendly. So if you're on iNat, you can join the Western Monarch Milkweed Mapper project, and that will send the data to this database, which is open source. So if you also want the data for something, it's there. If you're a researcher or looking for information, you can check out this website. And I just want to thank all of you for listening, and to all of our members that make our work possible. Thank you.
Angela, thank you very much for that presentation. We're going to have a few questions for you, Angela, if it's cool. We're also getting a little bit of static from your end, I believe. Maybe
you know
from.
Let me turn off the AC.
Okay, it's all good.
Maybe that's it.
If it's a little monarch caterpillar, just leave it. But if it's not,
is that better? I'll try and stand near the speaker.
It sounds about the same, but it's not too bad, Angela.
Okay. Sorry, so I came into the office.
I just wanted to let people know that there are a few resources in the chat box as far as where you can find seed. There was someone who said they were giving live plants away, it sounded like. If that person could repost, maybe we could clip it so it stays in the chat so people can find it easily. And some people were concerned about what we were doing as far as collecting in our national park land, about collecting too much seed. And because 1 million seed sounds like a lot of seed, and it is. But if you guys know milkweed, you know one little pod can create like 100 to 200 seed on each pod if we collect it correctly and it's healthy seed. So if you just do the math on that, and there's tens of thousands of milkweed plants out here, we definitely do not want to take more than we need to, but it's a tiny amount that we're taking. And our goal is to seed bulk it in a seed farm that we have, to where we have, so we don't have to take so much from native nature. But I think if you could just reemphasize 2 points, Angela. Tropical milkweed, what is Xerces stance, and coastal plantings. I think people are having a little bit of a hard time distinguishing, and I'm going to give a talk, I think at 1:30 or something, about pollinator plants, right? Which is, I see it as coffee in the morning for the monarchs, and then the milkweed plant, which is the food. Right. So if you could talk a little bit about coastal, what they should be planting, and then tropical.
Right. So we do not recommend planting tropical milkweed. I think there are 2 problems with it. So it doesn't senesce in the winter. It stays green year round. And so monarchs can have this parasite called OE on them. So they visit the milkweed, the OE gets on the plant, and it builds up over time. And so when other monarchs come in, they can pick up that parasite. That's one reason why we suggest if you have it in your yard and you don't want to replace it, to cut it down in the fall. It just is hard to do if you have monarchs visiting your yard. You have to have a heart of stone to cut back that tropical milkweed. So that's one thing. The other thing is there's some evidence that it might disrupt the migration. There's a study in Texas where areas with tropical milkweed near the coast had year-round resident monarchs, and monarchs coming through in the migration tended to stop there. They had higher rates of disease coming in, and then became reproductive. So when monarchs are headed to the overwintering sites, they're in reproductive diapause. It's like a holding pattern. So they're not reproducing, they're just kind of like holding, They got to wait until the spring, and there's some evidence that tropical milkweed can disrupt that. So we recommend just planting the native species where they're historically native. In terms of the coast, north of Santa Barbara, our rule of thumb is not to plant milkweed within 5 miles of the coast. South of Santa Barbara, our rule of thumb is 1 mile of the coast, or within 1 mile. I mean, when you look at Google shots of the coast, it's a lot of times it's just homes there. There's not groves left. So if you can avoid planting milkweed in Southern California near the overwintering sites, they just don't need it, right? They need nectar during the winter. They don't need to be they don't need to be reproducing, so they don't need milkweed. That's our recommendation. Our rule of thumb is in Southern California to avoid planting it within 1 mile of the coast. If there's no overwintering sites nearby, which you can check on our Thanksgiving Monarch count website as an interactive map of overwintering sites, then it's probably fine. I think the bigger issue is replacing tropical milkweed with native milkweed.
Perfect.
And yeah,
Hopefully
nectar
that's a little
plants
bit
is really important. Sorry.
Yeah, no. I'm using your guys' sheet in the afternoon as a reference for the pollinator, the nectars for late and early.
Yeah.
Can you put up that screen while we're talking of your 2 new sheets for Be Safe? Because I think that's super powerful for people to just print out or even have on their phone. You know what I found?
Yeah.
I've been in the nursery world for over 15 years. And what I found, people get a bad rap, like the big box stores, like, oh, they don't care, they don't water their stuff. I'm going to disagree. Most people that I've found who either work in big box stores watering plants or just have worked at a local nursery for years, they care. They love plants. And while it's hard for us to change and we feel bad, like, oh, we've been selling the wrong plant, if you come at them correctly and you come at them as a friend, a lot of folks, they want to help you. They want to sell you the plant that you want. And so I think these things these sheets that you guys have produced are super easy to use, and they're on your website, right?
Yep. And I put in the chat, I put a link to all of the things that I talked about. So there is a link to these in the plant, but in the chat. You can just, if you Google Be Safe Plants on our website, these will come up. But yeah, they have a list of questions to ask. I think a lot of people just don't think about it. And another thing maybe is being less picky about the plants that you buy in terms of maybe it has some insect damage on it and you accept that. It doesn't have to be a pristine plant, but it's safe for pollinators and monarchs. And like Antonio said, yeah, I agree. I think a lot of people care about pollinators. They want to do the right thing and maybe they just don't know. So yeah, that's what the other guide is for nurseries, to give them some suggestions. And our pollinator team is amazing. They work with people all the time on integrated pest management. So if you're in a situation where you want to come up with better practices, we can help you with that.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Izzy to jump in with a question in just a second. I want to cover 2 things. Someone mentioned that they're having trouble growing stuff from seed. We are going to cover after lunch growing stuff from seed. I just want to give you guys a few tips real quick in case you can't stay. Soaking your seed in warm, not hot water overnight, just like you would frijoles. I don't know why all my analogies are around beans, but just like you do when you cook beans, it helps soften. I mean, beans are a lot harder than milkweed seed, but it helps just prime the seed and get them ready for germination. You want to bury your milkweed seed about 1/4 inch so that it doesn't see light. And this is just for narrow leaf milkweed. The other ones we'll get into because we do recommend cold stratification for the other ones. But for narrow leaf milkweed, soak it in warm water overnight, just like you would your beans, and then bury it 1/4 inch, and then make sure you sow it during the warm season. And if you don't have warmth, you want to provide heat for it. But I would just recommend you just do it in March and April when it's warm. And that should give you a lot more success than what you guys maybe have been seeing. So Izzy, do we have a question for Angela?
Yes. Sunny is wondering, are there efforts made to restore or enhance overwintering sites themselves? Should we be planting more trees or other plants in those areas?
Yes, so we have a grant from the Wildlife Conservation Board to work with 3 state parks. In your area, I think it's Rio Carrillo, and there's another one. So we have
I think
three
it's
state parks. Go ahead.
I think it's either Malibu or Magoo, I think, right?
No, it's on the next slide. San Clemente. So Emma Pelton is our Monarch lead. She's doing this work. She's really knowledgeable about the overwintering sites, and she's also working with Pismo Beach. So yeah, they need to be actively managed, and there's a lot of pressures that the overwintering sites face, right? We've got drought. Eucalyptus are not necessarily long-lived trees. They're susceptible to some disease. So you have drought can make them more susceptible to those diseases. There are native trees that the monarchs will roost in. They're slower growing, but so there's a lot to think about. You need nectar sources, you need those groves, and then there are other trees surrounding those groves that provide wind barriers. So when trees get cut down or knocked down in storms, it can create like wind tunnels. It can change the temperature in those overwintering sites. So they need to be actively managed, and that is one thing we've been doing is talking about looking at the trees. Are they healthy? Where do we need to start planting more trees? So yes, planting trees is a great way to go about it. It's good to start evaluating where, the health of the trees in those groves, where the wind breaks, where do we need to reinforce that for sure. And then winter nectar is a great way to support monarchs in those overwintering sites. And then again, if you can advocate with your local community to protect those sites, because as of now, they're not formally protected from being cut down for development. Wildfire is a problem. So yeah, advocating for your local overwintering site is a great way to support monarchs.
Yeah, we had a comment about if we're working or somebody working with the Resource Conservation District in Ventura. We are in fact, Andy from Ventura RCD is going to give a talk in a few hours about the work being done in Ventura County. I think I just wanted to end off with you guys are a nonprofit. You guys are accepting donations. The work that you guys do is amazing, and you guys still find the budget to give away plants. And can you go back? Yeah, can you go back to that screen? Because for me, making plants affordable, making them available to folks who may not be able to afford them is huge. And there's community garden folks, there's school garden folks, there's just folks who just don't have enough money, and they live in perfect habitat for milkweed. I think if you guys think about that talk that Tat gave, where Ashley went and tried to find the milkweed, they said in the 90s, it's probably going to be developed. She went a few months ago and it got developed and the milkweed's gone. I don't see that as a lost cause. I see that as hope, because they built a parking lot there, but they also left room for trees. I see that there's a parking strip there. I see Caltrans starting to make narrowleaf milkweed part of their, I see milkweed up on the I-10, on the 5. I see milkweed in DMV parking lots. I see it in new housing structures. Once we get the seed supply, and then these pollinators, right? These pollinator plants for them to sip on as they return and to sip on as they leave. So I see, just because we've paved over a lot of it doesn't mean that a lot of our land's still exposed. And I think we have a lot of opportunities just in our parking lots and our front yards to do a lot of damage. So if you could just speak, I know there was a few folks who were interested on getting help with pollinator and milkweed plants. Could you just go over this project one more time?
Yeah, so it's our Habitat Kit program, and we started this in 2019 when the monarch numbers were really low, and we're like, what do we do? Like, all of the California staff are already doing as much as they can in terms of putting habitat into the ground. Like, how do we get more habitat in the ground? And then we're like, we have to help other people do it. And there are other people, like really knowledgeable people. Like, it sounds like you guys are doing amazing work, Antonio. I'm really impressed. So there are all these knowledgeable people who know what they're doing, but maybe they want help picking the right plants, or they can't afford plants because, as you said, native plants are expensive because they're not as widely available. Like, it's hard to find a lot, like Coyote Manager or whatever at Home Depot or wherever you go, like, isn't going to have the variety of plants that you need, so they cost more. And so that's how we developed this. And it's been really popular. So we've been able to get funding to continue this project, because I just think it's a great way to do this. And habitat is so important. not just for the monarchs. I think that creating habitat and increasing the connectivity, so how close these patches of habitat are to each other, is really important just for the long-term resilience of pollinators in the face of climate change. I think there's the social justice component, right? Because there are parts of our cities and towns that have been overlooked and don't have green spaces, which would be great places to add more habitat. And adding trees is going to help with heat island effects that we get with warming. So I just think there's a lot of benefits here. It gets people involved, enables the people who are already doing really great work to continue doing what they're doing. And so it's personally speaking, I love working on this project because there are times when I feel like, the world is terrible. And then I read these applications and read about all of these people just really dedicated to helping pollinators, making the world better. And it's inspiring to read the applications. So I really love working on this project.
Thank you so much, Angela. So if folks want to get a hold of you or find out about the Xerces project, they should just check back in April on your guys' website?
Yeah, April is usually when we have the applications open. They can email me. You can find my email on the website, but it's angela.laws@xerces.org. So if you have questions or concerns, and I guess I also want to put in a plug for all the other pollinators that are declining. We have soon we'll be launching a bumblebee atlas in California. So we have a new staff member, he's in Riverside, who will be running that program. So if you're interested in putting in habitat and then monitoring the bumblebees that visit that habitat, you can watch our website for that. I'm excited about it.
All right. Dr. Laws, we could talk forever, I think. I'm so happy that you got to join us. Just a big virtual hug to the whole Xerces family. Thank you guys so much. A round of applause for all of our speakers this morning. Thank you guys so much. We're going to cut out now for our lunch break. We're going to leave our screen on. If you guys want to donate, please go to xerces.org to donate and fund the amazing projects they're doing there. And we'll also leave our links up if you guys want to find out about the propagation classes we have, our oak woodland restoration that we're doing this month and next month, where we'll be planting milkweed seed or milkweed seedlings, and any ways that you guys want to help fund our work as well. Thank you, Dr. Laws. Hopefully I talk to you soon. All right. Thank you guys very much. We haven't had enough chance, I don't think, to even just promote ourselves. We've been doing a very bad job. And so who is putting this conference on is SAMO Fund. We work directly with the National Park Service here in the Santa Monica Mountains. We get to run the nursery here on their property. We do a lot of things apart from plants. But I'll encourage you guys, if you're interested in supporting this work, which is completely free today, to go to samofund.org. We'll put the slide up after this last speaker and support our work. We're trying to hire 3 part-time youth this summer. We're calling it Mission Milkweed. And we're trying to get over 2 million milkweed seed collected, which sounds like a lot, but it's actually a very small amount of pods. If each pod has about 100 to 200 seed in it, it's actually not too much seed. And our goal is to start bulking it here at the nursery so we can give seed away, so that we can grow plants and give plants away to community gardens, to restoration sites, to homeowners, etc. So there's the link in the chat right there.